Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 63rd audio file on the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SGAnon. It is so good to be back with you, Patriots. I know that it has been a little while. Had some things develop on this end, personally, professionally, with my little one, life chugging on. Additionally, we've had so much happen in the narrative space that the research for this file has been in flux so rapidly that several different renditions actually needed to be done before I could isolate just how I wanted to present everything to each of you for easy digestion and passing along to others. There's a lot happening. President Trump has talked a number of times about the run-up to the 2024 presidential election being our final battle. President Trump has said a number of times that world-changing events are happening, will continue to happen. He has highlighted the possibility of World War III a number of times. He's highlighted the possibility of a massive conflict in the Middle East a number of times. And President Trump, I think, had a very good lay of the land, if you will, leaving office publicly in January of 2021, primarily to prevent a civil war. But I don't think that the man had a full, complete understanding of just how much was at play and just how big the operation that his presidency, his first presidency, helped fulfill, and how the second commander-in-chief role is helping to fulfill now. I don't think that the man really fully understood just how world-changing and heavy on the gravity, if you will, that things would be. In the last 3 years, we have witnessed a number of things. We have witnessed the exposure of the Great Reset agenda. We have witnessed the exposure of the depopulation agenda. We have witnessed the exposure of Agenda 2030 and all ancillary organizations and agendas that come off of that. We have witnessed the coalescence in real time in front of our eyes, the wealthy, elitist, overlord wannabe ruling class, the elected class, the celebrity class, the wealthy class, and we the people. And now, over these last few months, and really going back approximately a year or so, we are beginning to witness, or have been witnessing, I should say, the full-on exposure of the military intelligence control complex, which pulls the levers, if you will, of all of the other component areas that have been awakened to mankind. It is that locus of control primarily that has to go. It is the military deep intelligence community. It is the bloodline overlords at the top of society, transcending governmental and nation-state boundaries, but who have a vested interest and a controlling arm in all hyper-advanced technology and all intelligence community dark operations around the world. It is that group that must be brought out, highlighted, and shown for all of the world to see so that we can move to next phases. As we've gone along in this journey, we've lost a lot. Many of us out there, myself included, have experienced personal death of family, friends, and others along in this process. And as civilizations and cultures, we have paid a heavy price with the launch of biological terrorism en masse onto the world beginning in late 2019, a plan culminating with more than 60 years of forethought and preparation. The justice that we all seek at the end of this must be a dispassionate justice. It must be a justice that is blind to the causalities on one side or the other. It must be a reckoning of the human spirit for the human spirit. It must be a discovery. It must be a discovery process of what it means to be truly free, truly human, and have true command and control of our world and our lives. Many of us out there, by no fault of our own for decades, have allowed most of the control in our lives to be done by others. We've toiled away. We've carved out homes and families. We've built livelihoods. We've paid taxes. We have suffered. We have fought. We have sweated out. We have worked very hard to get to where we are today. And yet, in that process, very little true control laid with us as it pertained to where our money went or how much of our money we were able to keep. Very little control was given to us, virtually none, over our own minds and our own consciousness, with the nonstop, endless, continuous 24 hours a day assault that has occurred through the information space vis-a-vis military-grade psychological warfare launched again by that same deep state intelligence community. We have the world suffering right now, as a matter of fact, because of that psychological warfare. We have a tremendous amount of generational and ancestral writings of wrongs, injustices that are being balanced. But the difficulty in that process is that no one would believe them most of the time. If we look out and we see Russia's claims over Ukraine, or Dmitry Medvedev's discussions about the Baltic states, when we look at the Balfour Declaration, when we look at other treatises that have been put into place over time, usurping the lawful we the people ruling class in any nation or any territory of land anywhere, we have to appreciate that at least some of that, what is salvageable and possible to reorient in this day and in this time, must be done so in order to bring everyone to the table. If we want world peace means everyone. If we want world cooperation and synergy, that means everyone. We must get all of we the people to the table everywhere. And the only way that we can do so is to iron into and flesh out, if you will, issues, agendas, matters of cultural, religious, personal significance, and belief system significance to various civilizations around the world. We have to get everyone to the table with issues that have a lot of meaning to them. Naturally, as we look at what's happening in the world, we're going to talk about Israel and the Middle East today. But our file today is going to talk about a lot. Our file today is going to challenge your perceptions. Our file today is going to ask of you to extract yourself momentarily, for however long possible, from an emotional reactivity complex that all of us, including myself and others, carry vestiges of. We have been subjected to nonstop programming via our television screens and then various other screens and electronic devices for a very long time. And television itself has been around, at least in current form, since the late 40s and early 50s. One of the most effective, ways to manipulate and control a society is to manipulate perception. And today we're going to challenge perceptions so that you can make a better and more wholesome and more informed decision about the events happening in the world and your feelings, reactions, and responses to it. Without further ado, Patriots, let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to save the Middle East conflict currently breaking out for the latter portion of our file today because it is going to escalate. There is going to be significant nationwide involvement, if you will, from regional powers in the Middle East, as well as the superpower West before this process is over. So it will require a few minutes for us to dive into. What I'd like to highlight first are many of the other things that have been occurring while the narrative has been essentially saturated with the Israeli-Gaza conflict and the brewing expansion of the war, in the Middle East and in Northern Africa. One of the most important things I think to highlight in this information war is that while events are happening in the Middle East and the entire news cycle is completely laden with the same narratives on both sides, or on all sides, really, we're now seeing 3 and 4 different divergences in the mass consciousness coming out of this. This is a time that Russia has utilized to its fullest, and they have launched a renewed offensive in the central and east of Ukraine, headed for Kiev. A headline from just a couple of days ago: the Russian army is now carrying out its biggest offensive since last spring in an attempt to gain territory in the east of Ukraine. The Russians are currently surrounding and headed to, or not surrounding, but headed to, and eventually will surround the city of Avdiivka, Ukraine. Avdiivka is a junction, is a main road thoroughfare that goes through the central of the country, headed towards the west and the southwest. Avdiivka is a location of a lot of nefarious activity, as many of these other locations have been as well. While I can't comment, on specifics just yet because I haven't had a chance to dive into it, the Russians are committing a significant amount of ground forces and air power to this renewed offensive, and it seems to be coming on the heels of the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive. Now, remember, the Ukrainian counteroffensive was primarily launched to highlight out those remaining in the Ukrainian military, industrial, and mercenary community, but also to act as a vector for a lot of destruction for NATO weaponry, arms dealing, and also an opportunity for a number of Ukrainians, and when I say number, I mean thousands, to defect to Russia. As a matter of fact, the counteroffensive was such a failed spectacle that the Russian army set up multiple hotline radio frequency connections where Ukrainian soldiers could tune in to a private secured band and surrender and defect. Tens of thousands of soldiers since July have taken this option, early August, have taken this option after realizing that the Russians were not going to be stopped in this process, and the Bakhmut meat grinder sort of teaching or showing, I should say, both Ukraine and the rest of the world that this conflict truly is for keeps as it pertains to Russia. Russia is engaged in a highlighting out of espionage assets of its own. The FSB has been going regionally throughout the nation, questioning government officials who took part in the stand down, if you will, called for by the Prigozhin coup. Remember, the Prigozhin coup, or the short 3-day rebellion, the shortest rebellion in history, was primarily an espionage counterintelligence warfare operation. It transitioned and moved a number of assets around the game board regionally and geopolitically. It allowed for Putin to institute a soft or expanded martial law, if you will, emergency powers essentially from the Russian government in Moscow. But it has also allowed the Russian government to highlight who would turn on Moscow, who would turn on a legitimate We the People candidate. Because like him or love him, Vladimir Putin is the candidate of the Russian We the People. It allowed them to highlight out who would turn and who would not keep their loyalty and keep their oath to the Federation. Remember, Russia reformed themselves post-Soviet Union as a constitutional republic. So there are processes that they have to put into place and put into motion before they can expand on usage of such powers. And the Prigozhin coup allowed, I think, many of those conditions to be satisfied and met. Additionally, the FSB has been tracking CIA cells along the border in the northwest of the country, and actually arrested several Baltic nationals in that area for espionage and spying. Those were released in Russian media, but I don't believe they've been released really or talked about really anywhere else in the world. Additionally, in the last year or so, we've had Russia detain a number of Western journalists for the exact same crime. So when we look at the expansion of hostilities in Ukraine, the Russians have been preparing for this for a while and have been telling people that these hostilities are going to grow. A perfect time, I think, to leverage the narrative lull as it pertains to their military operation would be the exact time that we're seeing right now, where the narrative, the consciousness space, if you will, around the world is preoccupied with the newness of the events and the volatility of the events happening in the Middle East. This is perfect cover for warfare gain. This is perfect cover for operations and campaigns that need to be moved into a next operational phase or a next rallying point phase. And I think we're seeing that absolutely right now coming from Russia. It is my personal belief, just based on the patterns that seem to be emerging with this irregular war around the world, that part of this is in preparation to allow Russia the breadth, the breathing room, if you will, and the space to shoulder a possible two-front war with what's happening in the Middle East. And we'll come to that here in a little while. Elsewhere around the world, we have the Chinese making large moves. A significant number of Chinese military assets have been spotted in the south and east of the country once again, when we're seeing video emerging of convoys headed towards the port cities. Excuse me. We also have a picture which showed up on X for a short time before it was removed, which showed the Chinese military, or what appeared to show the Chinese military at port in one of the cities there, loading heavy equipment onto a large carrying tanker. The equipment was ground-based and would only be useful for a ground operation. So one can draw conclusions on why one would be loading a ground-based offensive vehicle or a ground-based military vehicle onto a ship to be transported across the ocean. We know that China intends to go into Taiwan, and we know that that is going to come here publicly for a while. We know here on this program, just based on past files and the research that we've sort of fleshed out in real time going back now for nearly a year, that the Chinese involvement in Taiwan began long ago. It actually began in its current form sometime in 2022, and President Trump gave a formal nod to the Chinese plan, or Xi's plan, I should say, the Chinese Patriot plan, to reunify Taiwan with the homeland in September of last year. What we've seen since then was sort of a multilateral cooperation involving weird delegations from the United States House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and the Biden administration over this last 12 months. Both to Taiwan and to Beijing. And I believe what you have being played out before you is the final ironing out, if you will, of certain details pertaining to the exposure, pertaining to how these operations are going to happen, and quite frankly, the action, if you will, the actioning of different submissive and plea deals. For example, just earlier this year, shortly after a discussion that Blinken and others had with China's President Xi, we saw a number of individuals in the Chinese Communist Party removed from the public face. We've also seen a number of individuals in Taiwan, particularly in the defense ministry or in the defense sector, resign. This process, when it breaks off in the Pacific, will crash or will deal a mortal blow, I should say, to worldwide financial markets, especially in North America and Europe. A great many people out there are already aware that China, the Chinese Communist Party, is the forward-facing vector of the Switzerland-based mafia and the Middle Eastern-based mafia, which controls the world. They're the most public-facing totalitarian government, right? And they have been for a very long time. As a matter of fact, if you go back and you look at Mao and you look at the, association of Mao with the Rothschild financing dynasty, you will find that a number of different things, including the Red Book, were informed by members of the banking cartels out of Europe and North America, and actually had nothing to do with honoring the Chinese traditions, which is how Maoism was initially presented to the country. Looking over this and seeing how this is happening, what it looks like is we have a true reconciliation, if you will, of different financial wrongs that are going to take place in this process. The wealth of Asia has been stolen for hundreds and hundreds of years. The British Empire, the British East India Company, going as far back even as the Marco Polo expeditions of old. The Asian countryside has been sort of painted by the cartel West, the Luciferian occult West, as being somehow backwards, uncivilized, tribal in many regards. And frankly, for over the centuries that we've been here in the world, that's just not been true. There are some accounts of tribalism everywhere, right? We have tribalism even in the Americas and even in the European areas. And we even have tribalism, I think, in its most modern, advanced form occurring at the top of society right here, right now. But that has been primarily an information warfare lens to whip up a specific perception of narrative, which would justify or allow the public to swallow certain events. And we've seen that occur in Asia for a number of centuries now, with the pilfering of the resources, the land, and the wealth, and the enslavement of those populations, just as others around the world. So what we have in Taiwan and what we have with the Pacific, I think, stands to be more than just a symbolic Pearl Harbor style situation, or more than just a symbolic throwback, if you will, to the Great War of the early 1940s. I think more than anything, what we have is a symbolic reckoning of how power and how money is circulated around the world. Taiwan was fast-tracked into the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And we know that the CCP government was admitted as a most favorable trading partner to the World Trade Organization a number of decades ago. So as we see the Chinese, who hold more U.S. Treasury bonds than any other nation at the moment, and as we see Japan, who holds more of the U.S. commercial debt, manufacturing commercial debt sector as far as real estate is concerned at the moment, and as we see North and South Korea, which is essentially a match on top of a powder keg. As we watch these powers sort of carry the ball forward, we're going to see the erosion and then I think the cutting out at the knees of the Western financial markets and the Western financial system. Now, while that will be a difficult thing, I think, for a short time and in the interim, or for an interim period, what we have on the other side of that would be anything but. What we've got going on, I think, right now in the world, and I think each of you would agree, is a restructuring of the balance of power and the dynamics of play, a reestablishment of fair and just trade and commerce back and forth. And in order to do that, we must carry through with these processes. And if we can simultaneously destroy human smuggling operations and trafficking operations in the Pacific, if we can simultaneously, through limited island warfare, isolate, flesh out, and destroy every Epstein Island and every hidey hole where money, drugs, people, and power is kept, if we can right territorial wrongs as well in the process, and wake humanity up, and move to the point where we have a better, fair and just and consistent system of value exchange around the world, I think any of us would agree that that would create a world where our children could live in and be safe. President Xi has said on record that the future and destiny of mankind will depend on what occurs between the people of China and the peoples of the United States, and whether or not they can learn to live together properly. And I have stated on air since that statement that Xi's declaration sounds much more like a harbinger, or much more like a heads up, maybe a good faith warning, a gentleman's courtesy, if you will, to the events that may be staged to come. Shortly after that, we saw the Chinese space divisions from the People's Liberation Army become extremely active. We've had a number of operations conducted that Western media and worldwide media know about, but know virtually nothing about in the sense of detail. They know that they occurred, but they know nothing about them specifically. Space Force, in the same period of time, has had a number of unremarked, if you will, operations, but also a number of operations that they have shared publicly to certain degrees with the media, which I think serves a number of reasons. We've talked about Space Force a lot. So as we look at this, this conflict that's occurring in the Middle East, we have to appreciate that these other dominoes, that these other sectors, these other portions of geopolitical control and influence around the world are being shifted nonetheless. While everyone's attention is on one thing, we're able to accomplish much more in different sectors. For example, infrastructure in the Baltic Sea and in the Baltic states, primarily Finnish pipelines, and Estonian gas capability and infrastructure have been cyber attacked and sabotaged in many respects in preparation for what I believe to be expanded operations in that area. We've seen the British government sort of carrying forward with this censorship machine, modeled on the I think on the World Economic Forum model, but certainly in the United Kingdom being extremely relevant with what Ireland has just done. We have the same sort of thing happening in Australia. We have the same sort of thing happening in Canada. We have the same sort of thing happening in the United States of America. These opposing powers to this rising new balance in the world, the NATO central bankster cabal West, right? The Western Europe, the Americas, things of that nature. They are sort of being weakened and demeaned and demoralized, and really put through the ringer at the same time that the rest of the world is seeking to break away from that military locus of control. And that has to inform our interpretation of what's occurring right here, right now in the Middle East with Israel, with Hamas, with Gaza, and what is soon to be Turkey, Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, the UAE, and others. We need to appreciate a couple of things, Anons. The first thing we need to appreciate is that espionage warfare relies on disinformation to cover real events. But disinformation, while perhaps well done, is not true, and real events are true. And what you have right now in the narrative space, especially as it pertains to the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East with Israel, is a deployment of both of them in real time. In other words, we have atrocities that are actually being committed. We have atrocities that we can trace to both sides that are actually being committed. And then we have atrocities that are AI generated or some sort of mis or disinformation play or propaganda that are not real and are not occurring. And that is extremely difficult to acknowledge in the midst of a very emotional time. We're witnessing the world changing. We're witnessing the conclusion, I think, of bankrupting a corporation that ensnared nearly every nation on earth. This is the going out of business, if you will, of the cabal, and there is no fire sale. There is only fire. As they are pushed against the glass, as they are pressed further and further up, as they are drawn out into the light, as the military, deep state intelligence industrial complex is exposed in all governments, in all nations, in all we the people communities everywhere, we will all benefit from it. It is worth noting that the terrorist group Hamas was created by Israel and the United States in a joint venture operation in the 1970s to counteract the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It is also worth noting that the PLO was the preferred governmental form for most of the Palestinian people, and that the Hamas government has never truly had the support of their we the people either. It is worth noting that the Israeli people are very compelled, and very controlled, I think, in many regards, by one of the most egregious and aggressive psychological and irregular warfare campaigns launched against civilian populations really in the last 500 years. The Israeli people have been attacked in virtually every way imaginable, both physically by neighbors that were funded by their government, along with the U.S. CIA, and by their own government as well, by the assault on their judicial process, the mandating of COVID-19 vaccinations, and the severe imbalance of punishment with regards to certain offenses that can be committed in that nation. The Israeli government is not exempt from the military intelligence community infiltration. As a matter of fact, the Mossad, much like the U.S. CIA and the intelligence community of the Five Eyes, the Mossad controls a lot of what occurs with the Israeli Defense Forces and is responsible for the manipulation of foreign policy and the actions of their own government for a very long time, in coordination with civilian governmental actors, no different than the intelligence community of the United States and of the Pentagon, relying on the cooperation and sort of the alley-oop that comes from the elected class, the representatives, the public-facing officials of the people. One of the things that we're witnessing right now in coordinated fashion is the exposure of that deep state intelligence community in both Israel, in Hamas, and in all terrorist networks around the world. That exposure is not long in the wings, and the funding will primarily, and the arms trafficking will primarily be the two components that I think all awakened patriots out there will be able to quickly track and very quickly understand. The events that occurred on October the 7th of this year, on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, 50-year anniversary, and 50 is a significant number in Judaism as it pertains to the Jubilee year. What we witnessed was a coordinated failure of one of the most capable and one of the most modern surveillance communities anywhere in the world. You couldn't throw a pack of gum over the border between Israel and Gaza without the IDF knowing exactly where it was at all times and where it landed right to the point. They could pinpoint the rocks around it. And the idea that we had such a failure, I think for most of us around the world, we acknowledge that there's no way that occurred. There's no way that that occurred organically. That did not occur without some sort of design and without some sort of internal cooperation. And a number of the IDF patriots out there, just as in the United States military as well, and in all militaries, a number of the IDF patriots are very well aware of what happened. Some of them have even come out so far as to say that they believe this was a staged event to spawn off a larger conflict because of the lack of resource and support communication that came when the conflict actually ignited. What is so incredible about this, Anons, is that we had a harbinger from Q that this time was going to come and that it would happen in this fashion. Q drop 2337 on October the 4th of 2018 would have corresponded to a 5-year delta of October 4 of 2023, 72 hours prior to the launch of hostilities. And 72 hours is widely regarded as the hot zone for the launch of any military campaign. Q drop 2337 having a delta of October 4th, 2018, or a date, excuse me, of October 4th, 2018 reads, Israeli intelligence, stand down. It then has a termination code 3720 by 380, 2934 7 666 9238 001. The drop concludes, media assets will be removed. Q. Now, when we look at this, I think this is absolutely amazing because published on October the 11th of 2023, 4 days after the invasion, or the attack, I should say, not the invasion, but the attack by the Hamas militant group in Israel, we have an article published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which states, how could Israeli intelligence miss the Hamas invasion plan? An intelligence failure, this is from the first paragraph of the article, and I won't read all of this for you, Anons. It'll take us a little too long, but you can find this article at csis.org/analysis/how could Israeli intelligence miss Hamas invasion plans. An intelligence failure is like a plane crash. It is never just one thing that goes wrong. So that's where they tell you right at the beginning of the article that this is a patterned event. What other tactic, what other utilization, what other vector does the deep state use to attack we the people and to spawn off conflict, right? A plane crash, 9/11, 2001, a plane crash, the Pan Am flight of the 1980s, plane crash, right? So an intelligence failure is like a plane crash. It is never just one thing that goes wrong. It is instead a series of things that add up to a disaster. Hamas pulled off a complex multi-front assault on October 7, the kind of coordinated attack that takes months to plan and execute. That is not incorrect. Moreover, tens, if not hundreds, of Hamas militants were involved in the combination air, land, sea, and rocket assault, suggesting that the circle of knowledge was extensive. further, and this is a speculation coming from this article, because we know that the hit piece published about the Iranian support of Hamas, while extremely likely, and I'm not denying that, Patriots, I'm not saying that that is not an extremely likely situation, but it is not conclusive at this time. But the article states, further, Tehran helped plan and fund the endeavor, according to the Wall Street Journal, with meetings taking place in Beirut, which means the circle of knowledge encompassed at least 3 nations. At first blush, the situation appears to be a massive intelligence failure. Now, I think all of us out there can acknowledge that an intelligence failure like this, of this magnitude, cannot occur in the absence of 2 situations. Either a coordinated external assault caused the intelligence failure, or a coordinated sabotage operation in conjunction with external forces caused or exacerbated an intelligence failure. I think we have both of these happening. I think this was harbingered by Q, and I think that this is the beginning of a true geopolitical exposure of the Mossad deep state intelligence community around the world, the same Mossad intelligence community that has been destroying and sacrificing innocent Jewish people, just as they have destroyed and sacrificed innocent Arab and Palestinian people for a very long time. What is so incredible about this whole process is it is likely to come back to ISIS, and it's likely to come back and actually nest at the root of the Democrat Party here in America, the American Washington D.C. deep state elite, the same individuals and a lot of the same circles that Russia is screaming from the mountaintops are involved in biological terrorism and an organized effort and plan to take over the entire earth. Now, I know that that's an extreme statement, but we have to acknowledge that President Trump is one to highlight out a number of different things. We'll get to his highlights in just a moment regarding ISIS. That's where I'm basing this statement off of. I do not believe that the Hamas militants are acting as Hamas of old, if you will. I believe that the Hamas militants right now in the Middle East are acting under the command and control of the ISIS playbook and the ISIS funding, in particular the funding from the United States CIA and the United States Democrat representatives in the Washington, D.C. military-industrial complex. And to highlight the military-industrial complex and to highlight just how expansive this conflict really is, we're going to talk about 2 things very quickly. The first thing we're going to talk about is, excuse me, one moment of silence. I apologize. I had a tickle in my throat there. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the combination of narrative warfare that is being deployed by all sides, seeking to erroneously or inappropriately influence your perception and your research of what the understanding should be. And we must extract ourselves from the emotional matrix, the MK Ultra tendencies that all of us have been saturated with all of our lives. We must remove ourselves from that. It is a difficult process. You could even say in certain circumstances it's outright impossible, but we must attempt for that. We must strive for that nonetheless. Jesus actually modeled this when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," as they drove nails through his literal hands. We have to acknowledge that Jesus was modeling and exemplifying how we are supposed to be, seeing one another in love and compassion, seeing one another through the eyes of God, despite the atrocities that are being committed, acknowledging that in a great many cases, most of those involved in the atrocities are simply being whipped up one way or another and do not have a true basis for what is even happening in the world. If we take to Twitter, I want to highlight out what information warfare really is and what it sounds like. And I also want to highlight out how deep the infiltration of the deep state military profiteering complex really goes. I did a search on Twitter for the word unprovoked. Excuse me, the word unprovoked. Unprovoked, unwavering, unabashed, UN, is a tactic that is often deployed in narrative and psychological operations because it provides a loading, if you will, an emotional loading that influences the perception of whatever is being described. So from the official Twitter account of Richard Marles, MP, Australian Minister of Defense, I believe, the unprovoked attacks from militant Hamas on Israel are abhorrent. There is no justification for these brutal attacks on Israel. Australia calls for these attacks to end and recognize Israel's right to defend itself. Importantly, I am advised that our ADF, our ADF personnel, not Anti-Defamation League, I apologize, who are serving with UNTSO are safe and accounted for. Coming over now to the Twitter account of Governor Mike Parson, Republican governor for the United States state of Missouri. The shocking and unprovoked attacks on our nation's closest ally, Israel, cannot stand. Israel has a right to respond and defend itself against these terrorist threats. I stand with Israel. Missouri stands with Israel. The United States must stand with Israel. Taken from a speech from former President George W. Bush, the 23rd, George Bush states that it's an unprovoked attack and Israel must defend itself, and it's going to be ugly for a while. They're saying unprovoked to calm their own nerves. This is the commentary from the poster on the Twitter account. Taken from the official Twitter account of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I stand with my Israeli friends in the face of these unprovoked, barbaric terrorist attacks. My heart breaks when I turn on the news and see this pain and suffering. Representative Jim Jordan. The unprovoked terror attack today and the murders of innocent Israeli citizens are a stark reminder of the brutality of Hamas and Iran-backed extremists. The indiscriminate killings of men, women, and children are sickening. We must pray for Israel, its leadership, the men and women serving in its defense, and all Israelis today. It is heartening that Congress has come together in a bipartisan manner to strongly condemn the horrendous attacks on Israel and the Israeli citizens. We must continue to support our great ally as it expels this invasion, overwhelms the extremists, and works to prevent Hamas from ever harming Israeli citizens again. From the official Twitter account of Megyn Kelly, look at this Washington Post headline. How about Hamas terrorists murder, kidnap hundreds of innocents in unprovoked attack? Israel acknowledges its war. Taken from the official Twitter account of Senator Marsha Blackburn. The United States should provide Israel all arms necessary to protect and defend itself against the unprovoked terrorist attack by Hamas. And then we start bridging into other candidates. We start bridging into, not candidates, other individuals, other arenas, other schools of thought. Now we're on to Representative Lauren Boebert from Twitter. Israel has declared war on terrorist group Hamas after this morning's attacks. Now more than ever, it is critical we stand by our closest ally and support Israel's right to defend itself. I'm praying for a swift resolution to this conflict. Stand with Israel. From the official Twitter account of French President Emmanuel Macron, I have spoken to President Herzog and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I condemn the attacks carried out from Gaza on Israel, its soldiers, and its people. France stands in solidarity with Israel and the Israelis, committed to their security and their right to defend themselves. Released on October 7th from the Biden White House, the United States unequivocally condemns the unprovoked attacks by Hamas terrorists against Israeli civilians. There is never any justification for terrorism. We stand firmly with the government and people of Israel and extend our condolences for the Israeli lives lost in these attacks. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has spoken to Israeli National Security Advisor Sakshi Hangibi, and we remain in close contact with our Israeli partners. From Vice President Kamala Harris's official Twitter account, I spoke with President Herzog of Israel and expressed condolences for the victims of the heinous terrorist attacks and underscored our unwavering commitment to Israel's security. And last but not least, Anons, taken from Hillary Clinton. My prayers are with everyone affected by the horrific attacks by Hamas in Israel. The United States stands in strong support of our ally today and every day. Now, Patriots, we know that the deep state is shameless. We know that the deep state will say and claim anything and everything in order to gain whatever end that they are seeking. We know that the deep state will project their own sins onto others. Just look at Russiagate beginning as early as 2016, and even before that. We know that the deep state has controlled opposition. We know that the deep state is very vast and wide. We know that the deep state has a small concentration of control and power and directionality coming from the very top, most of which has been submitted, removed from the world, replaced, or altered in some fashion. But we also know that a number of the mid-level, the elected class, the mules of the elected class, the staffers, the civilians, right down to the community levers of power in our nations and municipalities everywhere. That is an extremely large arena that must be given the opportunity to choose. What is so incredible is that we have an alignment of narratives, even down to the same wording and the same usage of psychologically loading terms, coming from all sides to feed the military industrial machine. A number of other posts, and you could get on Twitter and find probably 100 of them now. A number of others have called for the eradication of Hamas, the eradication of the Palestinian threat, the eradication of Palestinian terrorists, the expansion of arms deals to Israel, the immediate approval of arms deals to Israel, the same sort of fomenting at the mouth that Lindsey Graham has made himself famous for with the Ukrainian conflict. And it's worth noting that Congressperson Graham came out and stated that he was unequivocally in support of Israel and that Hamas must be annihilated. So when we look at the agreement of narrative, I think that should give us all pause. These individuals can't agree on a grilled cheese sandwich, and now that they're all out on this same issue, again, this is an issue that does not pertain directly to the United States in the sense that the American people and the Israeli people should be able to control and self-direct their own nations. But unfortunately, we have such deep state entrenchment and such interagency and intergovernmental dependence that has been set up by this power structure, which enslaved all of mankind for certainly the last 150 years, but going back for several centuries now. Unfortunately, that entrenchment is so thick and is so complete that we must pull ourselves apart at the seams. One of the things that is worth highlighting is that the suffering of we the people everywhere is suffering of we the people. The Israeli deep state military intelligence community has committed a number of war crimes over the last 20 years there in Gaza, much like the war crime that occurred in Libya in 2014 under President Obama. And no one really wants to talk about or acknowledge these things. Everything from teenagers being shot by Israeli snipers laughing to former Israeli soldiers, military intelligence representatives actually, discussing campaigns on the ground which involved the raping and torturing of children. This is the same playbook. This is the same deep state methodology. This is the same warfare tactic against we the people that has been deployed everywhere against all of us. And we're seeing the suffering highlighted out in a massive way in the Middle East right now. But it is worth noting that this highlighting is different. What we are seeing right now is the rebalancing in some ways of the power structures in the world. We have witnessed the discussion of gasoline, for example, and fuel reserves, crude and things like that being cut off from the Middle East. A blockade is coming to the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE, Qatar, and Iran will ensure that. Saudi Arabia has come out and stated that they hold Israel responsible for these attacks. We're seeing an Arab coalition, an Arab League, if you will, being formed, and I think is going to be invoked before this process is over. The Israeli Defense Force right now is preparing to invade Lebanon to the north and to move all of the way into Syria and head for Damascus. We're going to see a conflict erupt between Iran and Israel, certainly. Russia will also be involved, I believe, in that conflict because of Syria, because of Hezbollah, because of the CIA infiltration that exists in that area of the world. We're also going to see Turkey enter that war on the side of Russia. How the United States responds, I think, is a toss-up at this point in the game because we have, again, a continuity of government operation controlling a number of different factions of the United States military. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Force has been in the Eastern Mediterranean for 90 days now. This is a special operations capable force, and they were deployed there almost with advanced knowledge that something was going to pop off in the Middle East, and special operations tip-of-the-spear units were going to be required. We're going to see expansion of these conflicts to involve Egypt, right? And that's going to bring into the fray some of the African nations and the African economic bloc. This is going to be a rooting out of the locus of control of the military intelligence community of the world, the energy, right? The fuel that comes out of this area of the world, the history that comes out of this area of the world, the data that has been stored in this area of the world, the records that have been kept from mankind in caves and stored by the Mossad in different areas along the Mediterranean coast are going to be rooted out, I think, in this conflict and in this process. The hidden artifacts from the Iraqi countryside and Kurdistan are going to be brought out into this. The CIA assets from Kurdistan are going to be brought out into this. As all of this is occurring, Russian President Putin travels to where? He travels to Kyrgyzstan to discuss bilateral cooperation financially, which I think will inevitably turn into a reincorporation discussion, which is going to give Russia territory, or the Russian Federation of States territory, right down there into that Eurasian Caucasus area once again, where they are going to have a geopolitical interest in what's occurring in the Middle East. In other words, this is a genuine rebalancing of the dynamic of power around the world, and I find it fascinating. I find it extremely telling that all of the NATO nations, all of the NATO Western-backed governments, all of the central bank governments out of North America and Western Europe and different Commonwealth realms were sort of all in a race with one another for who could get to the I Stand With Israel podium faster. I stand with Israel as well. I have wonderful friends who are Jewish individuals who are some of the most phenomenal people anywhere in the world. My heart goes out to one of those families who I know is on the ground in Israel right now and has witnessed atrocities being committed by this deep state Hamas militant group that is funded again by the CIA and the Israeli Mossad. My heart bleeds for everyone that has been caught in the crossfire of this conflict, but we must acknowledge this conflict for what it is. This conflict is a restoration of power in the world. This conflict is a restoration of personal and cultural identity and a purging, a cleaning, if you will, or a transfiguration, if you will, of the identities of what the Israeli people believe their government in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem to be, and what the governments around the NATO central bank backed West believe, and the policy that they carry out in the world. No different than Ukraine, no different than China and Taiwan and the Pacific, no different than the rebalancing and the disconnection of the African nations from their resource pilfering, military control, and occupation emanating from the West, the post-colonialism that never ended. This is the same sort of situation. History is important. History matters. What has occurred to we the people matters. And the obfuscated, distorted, hidden history, the manipulated history out there that has informed a number of our lenses about everything from religion to dynamics of power in the world to the identities of cultures and entire peoples and civilizations. Much of it is completely unhelpful and will not serve us in this process. We must realize that this is genuine suffering happening between genuine human beings who are caught between, or amongst, I should say, a group of individuals that are in power and control all around the world and are being shown out for who and what they are, and are particularly being shown out for how evil and to what steps they are willing to go to achieve their ends. And to highlight out that evil, we have to remember that ISIS, the terrorist caliphate that rose under President Barack Obama and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and then rose even more in Obama's second term, we have to acknowledge that that brutality was evidence from this deep state, was evidence of what this deep state is capable of. And we have President Trump highlighting ISIS just recently. As a matter of fact, if we come to TruthSocial, on October the 13th, 2023, so that's today, 2:54 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time, President Trump tweets out two hashtags only in the body of this post: I stand with Israel, I stand with Bibi. I and S in both of those statements are capitalized. ISIS, ISIS. And then what's amazing is less than an hour later, President Trump puts out a post that says, many are using an example of just the way ISIS was defeated in Iraq and Syria, Hamas will likewise be defeated. Please remember that it was the Trump administration that defeated ISIS, and quickly, after years of futile attempts by previous administrations. Someday we will be given proper credit for all of the many successes we had. In the meantime, we will do it again in 2024. Make America great again. So this is the commander-in-chief telling us that things are going to be righted, that these groups are going to be routed, that they are going to be destroyed, defunded, and abolished and removed. And the reason I say, or the reason I believe that these commentaries from President Trump are inevitably going to tie back to Obama, is because I believe all of the events occurring right now in the Middle East are going to tie back to Obama, Biden, the former administration of the 44th president of the United States, the terrorism that was conducted by that administration, the funding of deep state takeovers and regime changes all around the world. I mean, this was a guy that dropped a bomb every 8 minutes. The Armenian countryside utilized as a vector and a conduit for nuclear terrorism. North Korea utilized as a vector of control and nuclear terrorism. The same thing with Iran and others. And so all of this comes back to Obama. But if you didn't want to make that leap, or if you can't make that leap intellectually, if that's too big of an assumption for you, let's come to npr.org, an article written on August the 11th, 2016. Trump attacks Obama as the founder of ISIS. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump declined multiple opportunities to walk back his latest charge that President Obama founded the radical Islamic State terrorist organization. In an interview Thursday morning with CNBC, Trump said he did not regret his statement. I mean it. He's the founder of ISIS. I do. He was the most valuable player. I give him the most valuable player award, Trump told the interviewer. Trump later added, no, it's no mistake. Everyone's liking it. I think they're liking it. When Hewitt suggested the president use different language to communicate the message, Trump responded, but they wouldn't talk about your language, and they do talk about my language. ISIS is honoring President Obama. He's the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS. He's the founder. He founded ISIS, Trump said Wednesday. ISIS is a common acronym for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Now, if we go back to January of 2016, this article ran on CNN, believe it or not. Trump says Clinton, Obama created ISIS. Donald Trump on Saturday said the policies of President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton created ISIS, the furthest the GOP runner has gone in tying the Obama administration's policies to the rise of a terror group. Going down in the article, it states, they created ISIS, Hillary Clinton created ISIS with Obama, said Trump. He couched his hit in a brief discussion of the Iranian protests outside the Saudi embassy in Tehran, which erupted after Saudi Arabia executed 47 people. In Tehran, they're burning down the Saudi embassy. You see that, Trump said as he opened his remarks. Now, what it is Iran wants to take over Saudi Arabia. They always have. They want the oil, and they've always wanted that. And then he goes on to talk about how Hillary Clinton and President Obama created the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria as a terrorist counterbalance. Now, what is so incredible about this, Anons, is if any of you have done any good reading and research regarding and good digging regarding what happened with the rise of ISIS in 2012 to 2016, what you find is that a number of companies, including a couple domiciled in France with large shareholders or large interests to the Clinton campaign in the United States of America in 2016, were actually the vectors for a lot of DNC funding, a lot of Democrat National Convention funding that ended up off book. And ended up propping up, if you will, the financial building out, the equipment, the capability, etc., of the ISIS caliphate. These companies supplied arms, smartphones, textiles, things like that to the ISIS caliphate in Iraq and Syria, in that area of the world. It's one of the reasons that the terrorist group ISIS was able to arise so quickly. What we're seeing staged right now, Anons, what's happening in the world, I shouldn't say staged, that's not the right word. What we're seeing play out in the world right now is a repeat of the late 1990s leading up to 2001. We have a tremendous amount of chaos spawning off around the world in rapid fashion. The same playbooks are being executed. The same narratives are being deployed. The same highlighting out of the deep state is happening, right? But now it's happening with a population around the world, a population of we the people who are aware of the different connections, the different symbiosis that occurs between these groups and how to identify and isolate them. What's happening in the Middle East right now is going to do two things. It's going to draw larger powers into a Middle Eastern conflict, spawning off the scaffolding of a true world war. It's also going to highlight out that the deep state, warmongering, military-industrial community of the West, and even those that are associated with the Arab nations, the Mediterranean nations, the African nations, etc., they are all going to be shown out for who and what they are, and their participation not only in funding terrorism and in funding the destruction of we the people around the world is going to be questioned, but the issues of biological terrorism, the laboratories owned and controlled by the Israeli Defense Force, the laboratories and equipment owned and controlled by the United States Defense Threat Reduction Agency and the U.S. Army's Chemical and Biological Warfare Divisions. All of these different nexuses, these different intersections and interchanges that are very important to highlight out to the mass public at large. These are coming about right now. You are witnessing in real time the undoing of the legacy, of the history, of the imprint on the annals of American discussion that all of the military-industrial complex over the last 20 years has sought to influence. That's one of the reasons I believe before this process is over, before this deep state dies its last, you will see some sort of terror threat or attempted terroristic event, a false flag. We've talked about a false flag on this program for a while. We are going to see that come out in the Western nations, in Europe and in America again, on a similar style playbook as 9/11, right? The radical Islamic terrorism, we need to go to war and destroy them all. And really, it's about launching a holy war of cleansing around the world so that the deep state can destroy certain bloodlines, capture certain territory, and maintain their balance of power, right? And that is not going to occur because the digital army is here. That is not going to happen with any sort of success because we are capable of destroying the narrative in real time. Within 36 hours, we have a number of extremely well-known good Anons with this conflict coming out, spawning on October the 7th. Excuse me. We have a number of very good Anons that came out within 36 hours saying, look, I want to support one side. I want to be, support this or that or the other, but we have to acknowledge the realities of the situation. And the realities are this: people are dying on all sides. There has been terrorism committed on all sides by both sides, funded by the same individuals at the top. And we have to bypass that blockade, if you will, in the consciousness of mankind, or we cannot move forward. This event is going to spawn off an energy crisis around the world. This event is going to give us precedent for launching international investigative coalitions, not only to investigate bioterrorism, but the infiltration of the election systems around the world, the infiltration of the media assets and networks around the world, the control of the corporate entities in all of the significant nation states everywhere that have command of the narrative and the media space, the entertainment space. This is going to highlight out dual citizenship in all significant entertainment industries all around the world. You are living in the most amazing, terrifying, confusing, awesome time to be alive. And I say that in full respect and reverence for those of us out there who are paying a very high price, who are paying a price of higher goods, who are paying a price of loss and death, who are paying a price of extreme suffering. The Ukrainian people caught in the meat grinder in Ukraine, the German people caught in the absolutely stagnant, dying German economy, the Israeli people who have been subjected to such terrorism from their own government in the last 50 to 60 years, the Palestinian people who have been subjected to terrorism by their own entities that have risen to power in their communities, as well as other regional governments around the world, not only Israel. We have to include that as well. They have been terrorized. This is a process that should be given all due deference and respect, but we should not allow that deference and respect to cloud the overall mission. We are on an awakening of mankind. We are on a journey to a new earth. We're on a journey, quite literally, to a promised land where our children can grow up in a free and fair society, where our grandchildren will be able to look back and hear stories about the greatest generations who, from the early 1900s to the early 2000s, took out, made efforts to stop a deep state complex from destroying humanity, and that they were actually successful. And we will honor those who have been passed in this conflict. We will honor those whose sacred calling ended before we got to the finish line, when we are at the finish line. Patriots, despite everything occurring, the world is in truly good hands. We have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to trust and thank in this process. We have a higher spiritual awareness that none of us could ever have reached simultaneously without the types of events and circumstances that have spawned off in the world in the last 3 to 6 years. We have a new understanding of who we are. We have a new understanding of geopolitics. We have a new understanding and a new concept of what is possible here in the world. And we are executing that possibility. We are moving that needle. We are attempting to make that change. And the enemy, who has been entrenched inside of our living room for hundreds of years, having their way with us while we sat blindly by scrubbing the floors, is not going to go quietly, and does not wish to go quietly into that good night. And yet that good night shall come nonetheless. Stick with it, everyone. Stay safe. There's a lot to be grateful for. There's a lot to be concerned about. More than anything, there's a lot that I think we can point to as evidence to show humanity is not only waking up, but is making a fundamental change in how it exchanges and builds and resupplies rejuvenates, if you will, its own consciousness with one another. That is the journey, and I'm honored to be on it with each of you. Be safe, everyone. This is SGAnon. I'll be back with you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.